Well, Travis, I know you already had Representative Adam Schiff booked. I thought we were going to have to reschedule since there's really no news to speak of.
Well, I arranged for that whole New York Times story just for you.
Yeah,
so
I guess we'll just go ahead. Good morning, Representative. How are you this morning?
Good morning. I'm fine.
Wow. As many times as we've talked, I don't even know where to start today. So obviously your reaction to the news that Donald Trump tried to have Mueller fired in June, even Fox News confirmed it last night on Hannity, and the president is still saying fake news over in Davos. Where are we, sir?
Well, can any of us be surprised that he's calling us fake news? Well, where we are is apparently the president tried to fire Bob Mueller once already, and we have to view this in the context of his having fired James Comey over the Russia cloud that was hanging over his head. At least that's how the president described it to Lester Holt. He's also attacked Jeff Sessions, Rod Rosenstein, Andy McCabe. These are other people that you cannot dismiss the idea that he might fire them as well. And if this investigation goes on longer or moves in a direction that the president doesn't like, there's a real risk that he could return to this idea. And I think we have to be prepared. I think we ought to take up legislation that protects Bob Mueller's job. But, of course, just another bit of alarming information about this president.
Where are your Republican colleagues on that? Obviously, Mitch McConnell and others have said, though, they see no need to have legislation to protect Mueller. What's their story going to be today?
Well, I think they're going to be pretty silent, as they usually are when information comes to light that they'd rather not talk about or try to ignore. But I think we're in a worse place than we were when this issue came up earlier and there was bipartisan legislation introduced to protect Mueller. That legislation hasn't gone anywhere, and what's happened in the interim is the Republicans have ginned up their attacks on Mueller. We see this in the Nunes spin memo and its attack on the FBI. We see this with Senator Johnson talking about a secret society of the FBI. We see this in the Fox echo chamber with Sean Hannity calling for Bob Mueller's dismissal. So they're amping up the attacks on the investigators. And the problem with that, of course, is it provides a justification for the president to fire Mueller. And it also means that if he were to fire Mueller, these GOP members who are claiming some cabal within the FBI may be cowed into doing nothing about it.
Let's talk about the Nunes memo. Obviously, I mean, this has just been an extraordinary week, hasn't it, Congressman? In the Justice Department has said this is incredibly reckless what he's doing, and there's a reason he's not showing this to the FBI, to even the Republican Senate chair. Correct? I mean, so I felt like you feel like you have no choice but to release your own memo, having seen the same classified information and knowing how he's twisting it, right?
Well, this is true. And, one thing it's important for people to know is when the Republicans took up this memo in committee and said, we want to show this to the rest of the House members in a classified space, I asked the members, how many of you have actually read the underlying materials? Well, we know the answer to that now. None of them, except Trey Gowdy, the guy who brought us the endless Benghazi conspiracy theories, not even Chairman Nunes had read the underlying materials. And so I moved to allow members to read the underlying materials before they signed off on this spin memo, and they voted it down to a person the Republicans voted not to see the underlying materials, but to vouch for the memo anyway. I also moved that the FBI and the Department of Justice be able to vet these materials and share their thoughts with it on the risk of exposing sources and methods and the accuracy or inaccuracy, and they voted that down as well. It was very clear then, it's very clear now. The purpose wasn't to put out something accurate or to inform people. The purpose was to spin this against the FBI, to prejudice the House members against the FBI, and to do the president's bidding. And obviously, I think the FBI and DOJ are exactly right. This is extraordinarily reckless and likely to get even more reckless because they're showing every sign of wanting to declassify this memo, make it public, and I think if they do, they'll deeply mislead the country.
Boy, they've had a tough week, right? First of all, the secret society text has turned out to be a joke. Senator Johnson has had to walk that back. The obviously Department of Justice said they found the missing text messages, just like, what was it, 2 days ago? The president tweeted, "This is worse than Watergate." The missing texts. Now they found those. Obviously, was a technological glitch that only, that did not just affect these two FBI agents, but many of them. Does it feel like the same amount of sheer white knuckle panic going on in the Republican Party? I mean, where are we at right now? I mean, where do we go from here?
It does seem like a lot of panic these days in the GOP as the reports come out that the special counsel has interviewed Sessions and the special counsel is moving closer to the inner circle of the White House. The White House, interestingly, is trying to paint themselves as fully cooperative, but of course, we know last week as well that when Steve Bannon came before the House Intelligence Committee, under instructions from the White House, he refused to answer a whole host of questions. To try to masquerade as being cooperative and instruct witnesses not to answer. And of course, Corey Lewandowski did exactly the same thing, came in and said, well, with respect to a whole set of questions about whole periods of time, I just don't really think I'm prepared to answer. And the majority in that case was all too willing to say, that's okay, come back when it's more convenient for you.
Yeah. So what do you make of obviously Chuck Grassley saying he's going to release the Don Jr. Transcript? It's just I had asked earlier this morning, does any of this matter? I mean, obviously Nunes has politicized the House investigation to such a degree. Does this matter in the wake of what Mueller's going to do?
It does matter. I mean, it holds the prospect of interfering with what Bob Mueller is doing. One of the other points that the Department of Justice was making about the Nunes memo is it does threaten to reveal investigative materials, which you never really want to do during an investigation until you've concluded the investigation. So, but the whole goal here is to try to interfere with the Mueller investigation. We continue to plod on ahead in the House Intelligence Committee, and we are bringing witnesses in. But I have to say, much of the majority focus is no longer on what did Russia do and let's get to the bottom of it and what was the Trump campaign involvement. Rather, all too much of it is just an effort to carry the president's water and attack the investigators to try to put the government on trial so people won't pay attention anymore to what the Russians did and what help they may have had from the U.S. person.
Congressman Schiff, as a longtime prosecutor, what happens next, do you think? I mean, again, it's always hard to predict what Donald Trump is going to do, but if he fires Mueller, if he refuses a subpoena to testify under oath, what happens?
Well, it is very hard to say. I think he's going to have to testify before Mueller, and he's pretty well, as much as this president can commit himself to anything, committed himself to doing that. So I think that's likely to be the crisis point. The crisis would come if he fired Mueller. That I think would provoke a fierce reaction in Congress, and it would put the Republican members to the test of how devoted they are to the institutions of our government, or whether they're going to be completely willing to abdicate their constitutional responsibility in the service of this deeply flawed president. At this point, no one really can predict that, but the signs are not all that encouraging, given all this hyperventilating about secret societies within the FBI.
Congressman, you and I have talked obviously a lot on the air and privately. As you know, my dad was a prosecutor at Nuremberg. He was a vice presidential candidate with Goldwater. I first of all, them openly supporting Nazis, let's start with that, in Charlottesville. But I mean, the fact that, again, as we say over and over again, Barry Goldwater is the one that told Nixon it was time to go. I just honestly don't know what has happened to this party. I mean, these Republican congresspeople and senators are really making themselves look beyond ridiculous, aren't they, with these just conspiracy theories? And I said earlier today, it feels like we're not just watching the unraveling of a presidency, but an entire party in the United States. What does it feel like to you?
What astounds me is how much this president has been able to remake the Republican Party in his own deeply flawed image. I think one of the most painful realizations of the last year has been not just what an awful president Donald Trump would turn out to be. I think many of us predicted as much, but rather how pliant, how complacent, how unwilling to stand up and speak out against such a flawed president and defend our democracy the GOP members have been. I would have expected much more and much better. I would have expected, frankly, more Jeff Flakes. And, people denigrate Jeff Flake because they say, well, he was going to lose anyway, so that's why he's speaking out. I came to Congress with Jeff Flake. I know him, I think, reasonably well. He's a person of great integrity, and he's also a very capable politician. If the only thing he cared about was being reelected, he'd be well on his way to reelection. The reason he wasn't well on his way to reelection is because during the campaign, he talked about how unfit Donald Trump was to be president. But when it became clear that nonetheless Trump was going to be the nominee, and the other Republican electeds around the country started falling in line, Jeff Flake refused to fall in line. And when Donald Trump was elected and the other remaining dissenting voices in the GOP started to fall in line, Jeff Flake refused to fall in line because there was something more important to him than simply being reelected. And looking his kids in the eye, I think, was one of those things. And that ought to be venerated and emulated by others. But sadly, he is in a class by himself.
Yeah, no, I mean, I firmly believe that Trump is going to take this whole party down with him. I mean, you and I did the Gay Pride March here in L.A. and this past weekend I was out with 600,000 of my closest friends marching, and I mean, I think the energy out there, and the more of this happens by the day, it just is getting stronger and stronger, don't you think?
I do, and I'm very encouraged that when the midterms come along, there'll be a march on the polls, where we will see people in vast numbers showing up on the day that matters more than any other, because putting a constraint on this administration by having one house or the other, and ideally both, in the hands of the party not in power in the White House, is the single most important thing we can do to, I think, protect our democracy.
Is Mueller going to recommend impeachment, do you think?
I really don't know where Mueller's investigation will ultimately lead. We have only limited visibility into it. There are people that he's talked to.
Yep. And quickly before you go, I know you have to go, but I mean, because of the Clinton precedent, a president can be indicted. A sitting president can be indicted, can't he?
I don't think there's any constitutional prohibition on a sitting president being indicted. There are prudential reasons why I think that's unlikely to happen. If Mueller were to believe there was proof beyond a reasonable doubt of criminality on the president's part, I think he would present that evidence to Congress for consideration of impeachment, rather than deciding that 12 lay jurors somewhere in the country should decide the fate of the republic. But there's no bar to it. A court might decide, if he did indict, that the trial should be deferred until after his administration. So I tend to think that we're more likely to get a referral from Mueller than see an indictment where he defined that kind of evidence.
Thank you for your patriotism, Congressman, as always, and your fight. And thanks for fighting for us on immigration and all of that. And we just always are so thrilled to have you.
Oh, thank you so much, and great to talk with you.
All right. Thank you, Congressman. There he goes. He's my personal congressman, Representative Adam Schiff.
He's all of our congressmen.
Too.